So I open the debate and I give the floor to the authors. First on my list, Mr. Butikofer. The floor is yours for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, the groups of this Parliament have come together to move a joint resolution on human rights breaches in Hong Kong. I think this is a symbolically highly relevant action of this new Parliament, because we have always held that EU foreign policy would be based on the fundamental values that our Union stands for: human rights, rule of law, and democracy. And when we see people rising in defense of their civic and human rights, we as Europeans must express our solidarity. And this is what we do with the people of Hong Kong through this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now for 1 minute, Madame Fotiga.
Thank you, President. People of Hong Kong are afraid. This fear is to be detected easily everywhere. They protest continuously. The reason of their fear is imposing of the extradition bill, and they think the concept of one state, two systems may lead to eventually their oppression and intimidation. I'm afraid that these protests are to continue unless the situation is solved politically that we appeal for.
Thank you very much. And now for 1 minute, Mr. Pizzula.
Thank you, President. Mr. Commissioner, proposed extradition law that would make it easier to extradite people from Hong Kong to China has triggered over recent weeks a most massive protest in Hong Kong's history. This is not the way one country's two-system principle should work in practice. We support the call for the full withdrawal of this law. Hong Kong government should immediately release and drop all charges against peaceful protesters and all those detained during or in the lead to protests for the peaceful exercise of their freedom of expression. Legislation of Hong Kong should remain fully in line with Hong Kong's international and human rights obligations. In its ongoing reform process and increasing global engagement, China has opted into the international human rights framework by signing up to a wide range of international human rights treaties. Therefore, we have to pursue the dialogue with China to live up to these commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now for 1 minute, Señor Urbán Crespo.
Apoyamos el derecho de
We support the right to protest all across the world. This is a fundamental right, also in the case of Hong Kong. They were protesting against the proposed extradition law. As in any other place in the world, we call for an investigation into the way the police dealt with peaceful protesters. We also protest against the hypocrisy of the EU that only speaks about human rights abuses outside of his borders and simply turns a blind eye when human rights are violated in Europe. We call for a dialogue between the EU institutions and China in order to guarantee the rights of the people in Hong Kong and to find an appropriate relationship with China to deal with the challenges of the 21st century, human rights, environmental rights, labour rights. Otherwise, this will damage our future relationship with China. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Now for 1 minute, Mr. Hetman.
Dziękuję bardzo, Pani Przewodnicząca. Trwające obecnie w Hongkongu pokojowe...
Thank you, President. The peaceful protests underway in Hong Kong are on the largest scale since Hong Kong returned to China. China could use the extradition legislation to apply greater pressure to Hong Kong and to manipulate its citizens. And so undoubtedly it's not enough to act from the outside. This bill must be withdrawn and opponents who have been detained must be released. I'm concerned about the freedom of expression and freedom of the press. Pressure is being applied to journalists. Self-censorship is occurring in what they say about China. So fundamental values must be protected.
Thank you very much. For 1 minute, 30 seconds, Mr. Hook, please.
Thank you, Madam President. We should all be proud of this resolution that has the support of the 5 largest groups in our European Parliament. And this is important because Europe, our 28 states, are strongest when we are united. We share an unshakable commitment to democracy and human rights, not just for ourselves, but for every person on this planet. Now for weeks, up to 2 million people in Hong Kong have protested on their streets. Protests against an extradition bill brought by the Hong Kong government, which is not elected by its people, and which would see people rendered to mainland China, where, according to countless NGO reports, torture, unfair trials, forced confessions are endemic. And this is entirely at odds with the reassurances that were given to the Hong Kong people when that territory was transferred in 1997. Police have met these protests with force and violence that is unnecessary, and it must be clear that here in Europe we support Hong Kong protesters. We support their call for the government to fully withdraw the bill and for an independent inquiry into the police actions. We call for free and fair elections. We say to the people of Hong Kong that the people of Europe stand with you. We say to the governments of Hong Kong and China that we implore you to respect the dignity and the rights of every single individual, and then together we can build a world of peace and justice for everyone.
Thank you very much. Now we continue the debate on behalf of the political groups. On behalf of the EPP, Mr. Kelly, for 1 minute.
Having visited Hong Kong and being a guest in particular of the Jockey Club, I saw what a wonderful, vibrant, sporting city it is and how the people enjoyed their freedom and peace. That's now being threatened, and I think it's absolutely wonderful that the European Parliament, in its first official session on this topic, urgencies, are highlighting the issues in Hong Kong. It's not right that people should be detained for exercising their right to free expression. It's not right that people should be detained for trying to promote their own civil rights, political rights and press freedom. And it is absolutely right that the European Union, working with the international community, should put pressure on China and Hong Kong to ensure that these violations of human rights would stop. And I think we'll have to be very vigilant over the next number of years to show that, number one, we stand by Hong Kong, and two, that we're against human rights violations anywhere in the world.
Thank you very much. Now on behalf of S&D Group, Mrs. Gill for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. The protests we've seen in the past weeks in Hong Kong are a really encouraging sign that the people of Hong Kong will not let their freedoms be abolished. The sheer scale is unprecedented, and the outcome of this crisis will be a turning point for Hong Kong's position in China. If the protesters prevail, this will be a really big win for freedom in Hong Kong. However, if Beijing wins, this will be a premature end to one country, two systems. You can rest assured that we will then see very many people being brought to trial under not ideal conditions. So the European Union must take a clear stance and support the freedoms in Hong Kong. It's really important that China is in global focus at the moment with what's going on in Hong Kong, and its economy is slowing down, and what's going on in Xinjiang. So I think it's really important in the summits that we have with China and meetings we have that we stress the human rights issue. And it's really important that the High Representative, the current one and the incoming one, take this issue up. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. Now, on behalf of ID Group, Mr. Bardella.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much. We, of course, want to see the situation resolved as quickly as possible in Hong Kong. The European Parliament seems to be acting as if it were the United Nations and imposing its will on the whole world. We're talking about national sovereignty when it comes to Beijing, but they're calling for more sovereignty, more democracy, more freedom of speech. But I don't think the EU can lecture others in any of these areas. The EU should be defending the common interests of our nations. What does it do when there's a complete lack of reciprocity between the EU and China in terms of investment? What does it do to deal with the major challenges of this century, such as artificial intelligence, technology investment that China is dealing with? What are we doing when it comes to Chinese companies taking up French land and threatening our food sovereignty? What do they do to protect our vineyards, our infrastructure, our airports, where Chinese companies are buying up this infrastructure? We need to be using our common sense here and worry first and foremost about what China is doing in Europe.
Thank you very much. Now, for the non-attached members, Mr. Vice President Castaldo for 1 minute. Who is not present? Okay, so now then we start the Catch the Eye. On behalf of the EPP, Mr. Pospíšil. Pan Pospíšil má slovo.
Děkuji pěkně, paní předsedkyně.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My congratulations to your first time as the chair of the Parliament. I would like to support the resolution. And I must say that the Parliament takes a continuous stance. Last time we spoke about two bookshop owners who were against their will brought to China. And therefore we are afraid that such a law could be abused against politically active people. So we support the citizens of Hong Kong, and we want to do all that we can to delete the law, the bill from the table. Thank you.
Děkuji. And now for 1 minute, Mrs. Grappini.
Mulțumesc, doamna președinte.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, dear colleagues, obviously human rights have been a subject often discussed in this House. We must ensure human rights are abided by all over the world. We are essentially interested in what happens in the European Union, but also in third countries with which the European Union has relations. This is a resolution that we are willing to sign. I wonder if we are credible in front of other members, other states, when within the European Union we sometimes fail to abide by human rights. We, of course, do not want citizens in China to suffer. We want human rights to be respected, but we have to be a good example ourselves first before we teach other people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For 1 minute, Mr. Bennion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. the proposed Extradition Act represents an assault on the one country, two systems principle, which was set up all those years ago to protect the human rights and autonomy of the people of Hong Kong. But above that, it actually is helpful to China too. And if China is putting pressure on the Hong Kong government to bring this act into place, it is not acting in its own interests. China sources the capital it needs for economic growth that brings prosperity to its very poor people through the financial sector in Hong Kong. And we're already seeing some of the jobs there fleeing to other centres around Asia. As China is so dependent on Hong Kong for its prosperity, it really should be putting pressure on the government of Hong Kong to withdraw this act, not putting pressure on to get this act through their legislature. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, since we have the votes at 11 o'clock, I have to limit the time for the KHDI session. So I will now close our debate, and I will give the floor to the Commission, to Mr. Commissioner Stylianides. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, you know well that the European Union is closely following the situation in Hong Kong. In recent weeks, we've seen the people of Hong Kong marching in unprecedented numbers, exercising their fundamental rights of freedom of expression and assembly, as guaranteed by the basic law. The massive demonstrations over the last weeks have shown the determination of Hong Kong people to keep the one country, two systems principle intact. I would like to take this opportunity of the debate today to recall that the EU's full support to one country, two systems principle and its implementation remains very vocal. The principle gives Hong Kong a high degree of autonomy and ensures the respect of fundamental rights and freedoms of Hong Kong's people. The principle is also key for business confidence in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, as you know, and as you already said, is an important financial centre and global hub for offshore RMP business and a strategic transshipment port. The one country, two systems principle is essential for Hong Kong to continue to fully play its strategic economic role. Since the beginning of the movement, the European Union has called for restraint by all sides, underlining that violence and escalatory responses must be avoided. We reject all kinds of violence. We were deeply shocked by the events of 1st of July at the Legislative Council building. The European Union shares many of the concerns raised by citizens of Hong Kong regarding the government's proposed extradition reforms. This is a very sensitive issue with potentially far-reaching consequences for Hong Kong and its people, for European Union and foreign citizens, as well as for business confidence in Hong Kong. The government has said that it will no longer pursue the controversial bill, but the tensions persist. We witness with concern that the trust between the society, especially the young generation in Hong Kong, and the government is more and more fragile. More protests have been announced. It is really vital than ever to engage in dialogue to bridge the tensions within society for the benefit of the Hong Kong people at large and the SARS standing as an international hub. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I have received 6 motions for resolutions to wind up this debate from the Greens, ECR, SND, GUE, EPP and Renew Europe. The debate is therefore closed and we will vote on the resolution today.